So Scream 6 is another Scream film, but this one actually feels like it's it's better embracing that kind of like that more engaging slasher element rather than just being more of like the meta movie that we saw in the fifth Scream film last year, which was just called Scream. It wasn't and like you had the perfect opportunity to put the little like 5 in like the S, and they didn't do that either. So it was just called Scream. It was pretty much like a reboot, even though it's not a reboot because it did have legacy actors and all that. Now, the Scream film from last year, I believe it was last year that it came out. I wasn't a big fan of that version of Scream just because I felt like it became too meta, and I kind of don't like how it was commenting on what's the term for it? Not like prestige horror, but like kind of like high-minded horror. So it's like, for people who watch stuff like The Babadook, and like stuff like Jordan Peele's Get Out and stuff like that. That's not real horror. That's just more of like the artsy, higher-minded horror films. And that was like the whole drive of like the killers in that film, was that they were obsessed horror movie fans and that they just wanted slasher films to go back to what they always were. Thankfully, Scream 6 is not that. In fact, Scream 6 actually has some really great twists because the film kind of starts off that way. Like, it starts off going the same route that you would expect from like the last Scream film, where it's just a bunch of obsessed horror movie fans who just want to, reenact horror and just like, carve out more slasher concepts. And then immediately and somewhat literally guts that premise immediately, saying, who cares about that? There's something much bigger here in Scream 6 than just, horror movie commentary, because we already did that. And that's kind of the one thing I like about the Scream franchise, is that even when they have lesser entries, like I wasn't that big of a fan of like the fifth Scream film, and even like, Scream 3 is a little bit behind that, they always have a very knowing nature to them, where it's fascinating just to see how they comment on the state of horror and slashers and kind of play around with the concept. The sixth film, I actually kind of like how it embraces a little bit of that meta mentality, but at the same time tries to be a slasher in its own right with its own lore. And a lot of that is contributed to the fact that it doesn't, because we got such a, compared to like the distance between like Scream 4 and Scream 5, we don't have to introduce like a whole new slew of characters. We can follow the characters from the last film, we can build on them, and we can develop with them, which is great because there's actually a lot to build on with these characters. So, like right out of the gate, though, we got to mention, yes, the setting for Scream 6 changes from like Westboro to over to New York City. So you've got a new playground of different settings, which is great for this type of film. I think it works. And we get to explore more of the surviving characters. We have Sam Carpenter, played by Melissa Barrera, and she's trying to come to terms with like the big shocking revelation that she was a relation of the original Ghostface killer, and it's trying to fight off this idea of like being a murderer is kind of like something she believes it's in her blood, like it's part of her legacy, and that it's something that she can't escape from, especially when you've survived such an incident and you want to just like deal out revenge and feel like it's warranted, which plays a fairly big role in the film of just like, contemplating violence and revenge and, how to combat it and how to like stop its perpetuating. Now, on the other end of the spectrum, you have you have Sam's relation of Tara, her half sister, played by Jenna Ortega, and she's kind of gone in the opposite direction. She wants to put the slasher business behind her. She doesn't want to go to therapy. She doesn't want to comment on it. She just wants to move on with her life. So these are two characters who are very interesting in terms of where they want to be in this, like they still realize that they're in a slasher film, mostly because like you have the horror nerd Mindy, who returns here once again to tell us all about what type of horror film they're in, what are the stakes, what are the characters, who to trust, who to not trust, and it's just kind of like, and it's I love how like Mindy doesn't have like a full grasp of what type of film this is. She says that this type of film is like a franchise film, which basically means that, like, no legacy characters are safe. There might not be plot armor. That something has to be shaken up, and that there's going to be twists and subversions. So it's a very, like I said, very knowing, but I love the fact that, like, that meta nature of, like, understanding horror movies doesn't play into the core aspects of revenge, because the new Ghostface Killer is specifically targeting Sam for something that happened in Sam's past. And it's not just like, like horror movie nerds obsessed with her. Like I said, they got that premise immediately, and just the perfect subversion that you want for this type of film. So we're constantly left guessing, who is this Ghostface Killer? What does he want? What's his motivation? And, is there more than one killer about? And this leads to a lot of great kills and a lot of great set pieces. Like, first off, I'll mention, like, the set pieces they have here are great. Like, there's a great scene in a convenience store where Sam and Tara are fleeing for their lives from Ghostface, who's armed with a shotgun at one point. There's a great scene in an apartment building when they've got to make a daring escape off the ledge, so you've got great tension there as well. And then, like, in a very over the top fashion, you've got a Ghostface museum at one point that the characters get trapped in and are constantly terrorized by Ghostface running all over the place. So great set pieces. But then when you get to the kills themselves are shocking for two reasons. One is because of the amount of stabbing and blood. There's a lot of it here. There's a few little callbacks to, like, some similar kills from the last film. In particular, there's a kill in a doorway where a knife goes into the face, which is, like, it's brutal. It's still really good, but it's just like, it kind of made me think, okay, this is like the fifth Scream film. But then there's some more clever kills. Like I said, there's, like, stuff with the shotgun. There's scenes where characters get stabbed multiple times, and here's the other shocking thing. It's more shocking who survives through all this, for how much, like, these characters are survivors at this rate. Like, in particular, like, the core survivors of, like, Sam, Tara, Mindy, and the name's escaping me at the moment. Oh God, it's Chad. They refer to themselves as, like, the core four, because they believe that since they survived the last film, they're definitely going to survive this film. Although, if, you keep track of, like, horror movie logic, that is definitely not always the case. When you look at films like, like the characters who survived, like, Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3, not all of them survived in Part 4. In fact, a lot of them got killed off pretty early in Part 4. So like, it's not as predictable this time, and there's a lot of surprises with that. The kills are just, like I said, the kills are bloody and brutal. There's some very vicious scenes. Like, one of them gets, like, tossed out a window. One of them gets, like, stabbed in the guts really, like, painfully, where there's, like, blood gushing out all over the place. Very vicious kills. People getting their necks slit. Tons of stuff like that. So yeah, like, in terms of, like, the atmosphere and the kills and better building up the characters, they do a great job with. Even the legacy characters, I think they do a better job introducing them here than I think they did in the last film. And I think that's mostly because there's not as many returning legacy characters this time, where it is more interesting to see, like, a few legacy characters, as opposed to just, like, pushing them all out on the screen. You do have that moment where what's her name? Hayden. I always mispronounce her name. Hayden Panettiere. I swear I'm probably butchering her name, but she returns as Kirby. And the moment they introduce her, they do the same thing they did in the last film, where she turns to the camera, they play the triumphant music, and I'm sure, like, the Scream fans in the audience are meant to clap. It's just like, woo, it's our favorite character from Scream 4. It's been a while. To her credit, though, I really did like Hayden in this role. As Kirby, who's become, like, an FBI officer now who specializes in Ghostface. In fact, like, I kind of like her. I really like her look too. She looks amazing in this film with, like, her short hair and kind of like the leather getup, and she has, like, this feisty attitude for catching up with Ghostface. So it was a lot of fun to have her on the screen. Another returning character, you have Courtney Cox back as Gail, who's still hunting for the best stories. Although she's mostly the same character, although she has a lot more to do in this film. In particular, she has a great showdown with Ghostface where, she's been at this long enough where it feels like, she should have some smarts for tackling Ghostface. And she does. That's one of the great hallmarks of Scream, is that it's characters who have been who are aware of horror films and the logic and what's come before them, but will still be trapped and still make mistakes, even if they make the smart calls. And for sure, Gail makes some of like the smartest calls in the entire film. And even she kind of gets a little bit of like, even Ghostface kind of gets a drop on her. She's like, even she's prepared for this. She knows about it. She knows like the little tricks of like when Ghostface is talking on the phone, how to track him and, where to find him in the room. All these great little bits that, just they carry like that kind of like wicked dark humor that you want in the film. And Courtney Cox just has pitch perfect delivery with that. And then, of course, you have a few wild cards thrown into the bunch just to, keep you guessing about who the killer is going to be. You have Josh Segarra as a love interest for Sam, who she fraternizes with, but you're kind of like, this guy's a little stacked and kind of a little bit... it seems like he might be in on this. You have Dermot Mulrooney as a detective who's very bitter and wants bloody vengeance, so you think he might be in on it. And then, of course, you have a few other characters, like you have like a, kind of like a little bit of like an outsider kid who kind of looks like Jesse Eisenberg a little bit. He might a little bit. Maybe it's just like the curly hair that's throwing me. And then you have like a very sex-positive roommate who could be in on it as well. And as the film progresses, there's twist after twist that keeps you guessing the whole time. And even when there's like a trail of clues led to who you think the real killer is, it shifts around even more. So it keeps you guessing, where it's a genuine surprise. And even when you get to the final twist and the Ghostface killer is revealed, it makes sense who this is and why they're doing it, and plays greatly into the themes of revenge and violence. Which is great, especially when, you have that theme and a lot of the characters here have a genuine motive for violence and revenge. And it's just, and it's not so much terrifying as it is intriguing and intense. Like with the last Scream film, I was kind of like, okay, this is more or less what I expect from Scream. But then Scream 6, it feels like it just got a shot of adrenaline. And, and it's just, I can't even pin it down on like one thing. It's like, there's lots of twists and subversions. There's a change of scenery. That's great. There's more kills. There's more blood and guts. That's really great. Although I should admit though, I was surprised by how many characters live in this film more than those that die, especially for how many stabs to the gut they take. There are so many characters who get stabbed right in the gut, like painfully, in this film, that it's surprising how many survive. But just everything combined, I think it makes for such a perfect sequel for a film that, for following up on a film that had to set up a whole new batch of characters, had to establish them, had to set new ground rules for Scream. And here in Scream 6, it feels like the characters have kind of come more into their own, and that there's a more defined lore to what's happening, where it's not just playing up the nostalgia, even though they do highlight like every ghost face from every other Scream film, but it's weaved in, I think, brilliantly here, where it doesn't just become, part of like the legacy sequel that you expect, especially since, they drop like the whole like changing of like the names of the sequel. There's no like, Scream Forever, Scream the Revenge. It's just Scream 6. It's continuing on, and it's doing what Scream does best. So at this point, for as far as this franchise has come, it's holding up remarkably well with Scream 6, where I must admit I'm actually kind of intrigued to see where they would go with the next Scream film, just because they've developed these characters enough where I'm intrigued, I'm interested, and they have and they weave the kind of the lore and mythology of slasher films into this so well that it just makes for a fascinating story. And it's edge of your seat horror, and it's Scream. It does what I love the most out of Scream, and this is definitely one of the top sequels of the series.